1927, New York City. The corner of 5th Avenue and 57th Street. This is not a construction site. It is a grave site. We're watching the death of a palace. The 130-room mansion of Cornelius Vanderbilt II, a fortress of granite and marble built to rival Versailles, to announce in stone and steel that its owners were not just men, but kings. For decades, this building was the epicenter of American power and wealth. Today, it is being reduced to rubble, sold for scrap, to make way for a department store. This single event was not an isolated tragedy. It was a symbol. It was the final, deafening crash of an entire era. An era of unimaginable wealth, grotesque inequality, and unbridled ambition. An era they called the Gilded Age. The question is not that it fell. The question is why. How did an empire built to last for 1,000 years crumble in less than 50? To understand how America destroyed the Gilded Age, we must first understand how it was built and who paid the price.
The story begins in the ashes of the Civil War. America was a nation remaking itself, stitched together by two things: railroad tracks and the telegraph wire. And from this chaotic industrial furnace, a new breed of men emerged. They were not politicians or generals. They were titans. Cornelius Vanderbilt, the Commodore. He tamed the railroads, strangling competition and binding the continent in a web of steel. Andrew Carnegie, a Scottish immigrant who rose from a bobbin boy to become the undisputed king of steel, building the skeletons of the very cities that would define the new century. And then there was John D. Rockefeller, a name that would become synonymous with wealth itself. In the chaos of the new oil market, Rockefeller saw opportunity. He didn't just want to compete, he wanted to own it. Through his company, Standard Oil, he consumed his rivals, using ruthless tactics, secret rebates, and corporate espionage until he controlled 90% of America's oil. They were called captains of industry by their admirers and robber barons by their victims. They believed in a new religion, social Darwinism, survival of the fittest. In their view, their wealth was not greed, it was proof of their divine right to rule. And what does a new king do? He builds a castle. If you were a titan of the Gilded Age, your battlefield was not a factory, it was 5th Avenue. Your castles were the sprawling cottages of Newport, Rhode Island. These were not homes, they were declarations of war, fought with marble, silk, and gold leaf. The Vanderbilts built the Breakers, a 70-room Italian Renaissance palace requiring a staff of 40. Not to be outdone, his brother built Marble House, which cost $11 million in 1892, over $300 million today. Entire rooms, ceilings, and fireplaces were ripped from the decaying palaces of European nobility and shipped to America, reassembled as trophies. This was conspicuous consumption. The goal was not just to be wealthy, but to be seen being wealthy. The new American aristocracy was determined to prove to the old European bloodlines that they were their equals, if not their superiors. But to build a new dynasty, you needed more than just money. You needed permission.
In the Gilded Age, society had a fortress, and its gatekeeper was one woman, Mrs. Caroline Astor. She was old money, and she looked down on the crude new money titans like the Vanderbilts. To Mrs. Astor, wealth was not enough. You needed pedigree. You needed to behave by her rigid, unwritten rules. Her power was absolute. She, along with her social marshal, Ward McAllister, created the definitive list of who mattered. It was called the 400. The number was not arbitrary. It was the exact number of people who could comfortably fit into her ballroom. If you were in, you were royalty. If you were out, you were nothing.
But every floating cloud has an engine, and this one ran on human fuel. To maintain a house like the Breakers took a staff of over 100 people. While the 400 danced above, an army toiled below stairs. This was the invisible world of the Gilded Age. A housemaid, often a young immigrant girl, would wake before dawn and work for 16 hours. Her world was a labyrinth of back staircases, scolding laundry rooms, and endless polishing. She was always on call, but never to be seen. A guest spotting a maid in a hallway was a social embarrassment for the hostess. The pay was minuscule, the work was backbreaking, and the dignity was non-existent. The same industrialists who spent $1 million on a party would pay their staff starvation wages. This vast, shimmering edifice of luxury was balanced on the bent backs of the poor, and those backs were beginning to ache.
If the first crack was below stairs, the second was in the factories and mills. Andrew Carnegie's Homestead strike saw workers gunned down by Pinkerton mercenaries for demanding better pay. Child laborers, small enough to climb inside machines, lost limbs for pennies a day. For decades, the Titans controlled the narrative, but a new force was emerging: the investigative journalist. They called them muckrakers, and the most feared of all was Ida Tarbell. Tarbell was not an anarchist. She was a meticulous, relentless journalist. For years, she dug into the dark, secret history of John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil. Her 19-part series, The History of the Standard Oil Company, was not a critique, it was an execution. She exposed his secret deals, his price-fixing, his corporate-sponsored spies. She laid bare the lie of the self-made man and showed the world the robber baron underneath. The public was outraged. For the first time, the Titans seemed vulnerable. The pen, it turned out, was mightier than the palace.
The public, awakened by journalists like Tarbell, was angry. They saw the grotesque divide between the mansions of Newport and the tenements of New York. The political winds were shifting. In 1913, the unthinkable happened. The 16th Amendment to the Constitution was ratified. It was the federal income tax. For the Titans, this was more than a nuisance, it was a revolution. For the first time in American history, the federal government had the legal, constitutional right to tax a citizen's personal income. At first, the tax was tiny, only 1% on incomes above $3,000. But the principle had been established. Wealth was no longer untouchable. The government could, if it chose, reach directly into the vaults of Vanderbilt and Rockefeller. A financial meteor had just entered their atmosphere, and it was about to be accelerated by a global catastrophe.
World War I did more to destroy the Gilded Age than any protest or law. It was the great final equalizer. First, it demanded money. To fund the war,
The top income tax rate skyrocketed, not to 5% or 10%, but to a staggering 77%. The government was no longer asking, it was taking. Second, it demanded labor. With millions of men sent overseas, a severe labor shortage gripped the nation. Suddenly, the housemaid who had earned pennies a day was being offered real wages in a munitions factory. The vast armies of servants evaporated, and they would never return. Third, it changed the culture forever. In a world of gas masks and trenches, a 100-room palace was no longer impressive. It was embarrassing. Conspicuous consumption became unpatriotic. The entire mindset of the Gilded Age, the parties, the arrogance, the detachment, died on the battlefields of France. The titans who built the palaces were now gone, and their children, returning from the war, inherited a very different world. They were the lost generation of the Jazz Age. They had new values. They didn't want 100-room mansions. They wanted sleek city apartments and fast cars. More importantly, they simply couldn't afford them. With the income tax here to stay and the cost of labor soaring, these houses became white elephants, beautiful, magnificent, and utterly unsustainable. The annual heating bill for the breakers alone would bankrupt a modern millionaire. One by one, the palaces fell. They were sold for $1, turned into schools, or, like the Vanderbilt Mansion, they met the wrecking ball. The Great Depression was the final eulogy, a brutal confirmation that the age of excess was over, replaced by an age of survival. The Gilded Age, an era of supreme confidence, had drowned in its own extravagance. The Gilded Age is gone. The palaces are dust. But its legacy is complicated. Andrew Carnegie, the ruthless industrialist, gave away his fortune to build over 2,500 libraries, changing the landscape of public knowledge forever. John D. Rockefeller's tainted money created foundations that pioneered modern medicine. The era left us with bitter lessons about inequality and exploitation, but also with great works of philanthropy, art, and architecture. Today, we walk through a world that seems hauntingly familiar. We live in an age of new titans, whose wealth, built on data and algorithms, dwarfs even that of Rockefeller. We see new, dazzling displays of conspicuous consumption, not in stone, but in space races and super yachts. History never truly repeats, but it often rhymes. The Gilded Age reminds us that no fortune is too large to fail, no power is absolute, and that the ground beneath our feet is always shifting. The question we are left with is the same one they faced a century ago. When we see great inequality, do we, like the muckrakers, dare to expose it? And when the winds of change blow, will we be ready? What do you think? Are we living in a new Gilded Age? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to explore more stories of empires, forgotten and new, be sure to subscribe and click the bell for more documentaries.